Bruce Alderman, how are you?
Great, great. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. I'm so glad to have you on. I was recently at an integral meetup and people started talking about you and everyone's eyes lit up. You are one of the main figures in the integral stage as they have it.
Well, that's really nice to hear. I don't think of myself or experience myself that way, but if anything that I'm doing, is having any kind of impact, I'm super happy about that.
Yeah. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, perhaps in the context of integral in your career?
Sure. I'm a professor in a small college. It actually has just merged with a little bit bigger college. It was John F. Kennedy University,
Mhm.
and it's merged with National University. Uh, I went to that university many years ago to get a transpersonal counseling psychology degree.
Hmm.
And I was interested in integral theory, but I couldn't find anything really on integral theory when I came out to study.
Hmm.
During my last year, they opened up an integral psychology department. I was like, so I stayed on an extra year and I went through another year of training in the integral psychology and then kind of did a joint degree of transpersonal and integral. And I was planning to establish a practice, uh, but in the middle of doing that, doing some internship and other things, I got an invitation to start teaching. And I just said yes. I wanted to give it a try. And I actually, I mean, I don't say this often. I haven't said this on podcasts before, and I don't know why I'm telling you, but I didn't see myself as a professor. And I was at the time part of a men's group, and we were just meeting and having dialogues and kind of helping each other craft parts of our lives. And so they just deliberately started calling me Professor Bruce until I could get on board with it because it didn't feel right. But gradually I grew into it and I really enjoy it. Yeah.
Wow. There is um there is such value in that positive affirmation. I mean,
Mm.
yeah, without maybe as a joke or kind of subconsciously, they were kind of pushing you into taking on a bigger leadership role. And I mean, I think if somebody says something enough to you, even if it's a joke, I think it internalizes.
It did. It helped me step into that. And they were saying it in good ribbing spirit and okay, Professor, but it worked. It worked. It gradually I was able to step into it. So
I think there's a lot of value in those men's groups and women's groups too. Exactly the same. I think they should be a vital place in our society. Um, I'm not super familiar with integral. My partner Elliot Redelman he's so into it. He runs the Sydney chapter of integral right now, and I go sometimes. I just went to the first live meetup I've ever been to because of COVID.
mhm.
This was the first live one since we got together, and it was actually quite surprising. On Zoom, unfortunately on Zoom something's missing. But when I meet up in Integral in someone's apartment and we're all talking to each other, there's such a spark and there's such a connection and Integral I don't quite understand Integral philosophy, but I know that the people who attended the Integral meetup seemed so in tune with each other and connected and emotionally aware. It was really astounding. I'm very glad I went.
There is such a difference between, I think, the Zoom meetings and the in person. Zoom is great. There's a lot that can happen on it. And of course, you and I are both doing podcasts and things like that. And it definitely opens up a lot of, uh, you know, spaces for communication and connection and inspiration. And, I'm not going to knock it at all, but in person, it's just different. And when I would attend the integral theory conferences, they were just everyone says it. It's a cliche by now, but the best part of the conference was all the stuff that was happening in between as these people who are in some ways resonating um, with similar levels of development and core values and perspectives. They may not be in the same fields at all, but there's some core around which they're able to resonate, and it's a beautiful thing. And it's like discovering your own, tribe. It's hard to find. Usually in our local settings, I just went. maybe a week or two ago to a gathering at Roger Walsh's house. And Roger Walsh is a well-known psychologist, and he's also been active in transpersonal psychology, but he's also a close friend of Ken Wilber and is a big fan of Ken Wilber's work.
Ken Wilber is
And
the creator of Integral.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least he's creator of his own brand of integral. There's other kinds of integral thinkers, but for the Ken Wilber version, yes. And we had a gathering because after we had this meeting in Austin not long ago, people around the world all looking at kind of the global crises going on, and some were from the integral community and some from other communities, and they were all getting together just to think about what's going on the world stage. And I met Roger for the first time in person there. We knew each other from writings and video and stuff. And so after we got back to California, he said, I want to call a gathering of the integral tribe after COVID, because everybody had been separated for so long. So we all met a little dock out in a lake by his house. And just, it was a wonderful thing. I'm just resonating with what you said in terms of all these people gathering from very, very many different backgrounds and fields. And we didn't know each other. A lot of us didn't. But the immediate connection was just there. Just being able to see into each other's worlds. It wasn't all cohering around a single ideology. It was all being able to see into each other's worlds in a way that was just a really lovely experience.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in Integral right now, is because what you said about ideologies, because I keep thinking, I've been thinking about this problem for years of how I personally can deal with people of other ideologies that trigger me for whatever reason. And maybe more of how the world as a whole can deal with other people that trigger them. And I actually think that perhaps thinking about the world stage is a deceptive construct. Maybe the only thing to do is think about myself and how I can deal with people of other ideologies. But in Integral, one thing I noticed was that when I went to this meetup, there was a person who was just had different beliefs. Like, maybe I don't need to get into that, but it was just different beliefs that usually in a different setting might have like triggered other people and caused a debate and all but like Integral was able to hold, everyone was able to hold that space, and there was not even a whisper of a debate or being triggered or something. We were just able to hold that person in space and like accept them and give them kindness and like treat them with basic humanity. And so I would like to get to the bottom of how Integral does this. And like, I mean, just for our listeners that don't know what Integral is, can you provide an explanation? Because I cannot.
There are a number of different strands to it. I think you can look back all the way in ancient India and already see attempts in that direction, where basically people, especially in diverse contexts where there's a lot of plurality of values, we have to learn how to navigate in that. And one way is to subordinate everybody there to a dominant ideology. And that's often been done. But sometimes moves are made either to acknowledge the plurality or hopefully take a step beyond that to find some underlying threads of unity through the plurality in a way that doesn't erase the dignities of the plurality. And I think that's really what Integral is wanting to do. It's not just wanting to open the door up and say, this is a plurality of views, and we all tolerate that. That's pretty much what postmodern culture has been trying to do. But often it's this uneasy tolerance and balancing, and it's a surface kind of thing that can easily fracture. And so Integral is looking at, it's a system of thought and a mode of inquiry, and it involves some maps and basic insights. But the fundamental drive, I think, is to appreciate and honor plurality and to be able to find the unity in diversity, the unitas multiplex, and and really begin to thrive in that in different ways. And integrative pluralism is what people are aiming for. Back in ancient India that I was mentioning, there was materialist philosophy, there was budding Buddhist philosophy, there was budding Jain philosophy, there were different yogic schools and schools of world denial and asceticism and schools of hedonism and indulgence. And so there was a big explosion of different ways of looking at and relating to the world. And we can find some similar things in the ancient West. But in this context, among the Jains, they strove for what they called anikantavad, which is non-one-sidedness, or the circle of perspectives. So they used this symbol of like a jewel that has many facets, and nobody beholding the jewel is going to be able to see all the facets. You need a circle of people to be able to behold all the facets, which also relates to the blind men and the elephant kind of parable, right? And so the idea there in the Jains proposed in ancient India is that reality is too big for any one person or any one system to hold it all. But we can all listen to each other, and we can all gain insights for each other, and we can all create a circle that allows for the sharing of perspectives from your place, and practices for deep listening, in order to be able to ingest those perspectives and let them change you, not necessarily by losing your own place or integrity, but it's a process. So I think that is largely what integral is trying to do in its own modern frame. For integral theory, it arose out of a psychological context. Ken Wilber was a young man who was in medical school and was studying that, but was also receiving therapy and doing a little bit of meditation practice and just exploring what was emerging in the culture at that time in the 70s. And one thing that he noticed is that he was benefiting from Zen practice, he was benefiting from Gestalt therapy, he was benefiting from psychoanalysis, but all these people hated each other and they all denounced each other. And so he became concerned that they all hate each other, but they all have something to say, and they're all helping me. And how do I begin to bring that together? And so that was his initial impulse: is how can Zen, psychoanalysis, and Gestalt, and humanistic therapy, and behaviorism all be true? And so that's what he began wrestling with. And at first he laid it out in terms of like a spectrum of consciousness, like a light spectrum, and that each one of them were dealing with different layers of the spectrum. But gradually it complexified, and he realized it's not only about this layering, but it's about perspectives and other kinds of things that bring the differences among the approaches. But that if you really understand what are the underlying factors that both unite them and differentiate them, then you can begin to hold them in a bigger embrace and work effectively with all of them. That's not a mere eclecticism, but it's not also a single move to unify everything under a single master narrative that dominates it. So that's the kind of dance that I think Integral tries to do, and why it's applicable, I think, politically and culturally, not only philosophically or psychologically.
I think it's something we need politically and culturally.
Right.
I mean, in these things seem to be getting crazy. I don't know if things were always this crazy and the media was different, or if we're living in particularly strange times. But it almost, I mean, and I don't know how true this is, but like, the January 6th riots happened, or the whatever it was, and from my perspective back then, they were a bunch of conspiracy theorist extremists who were doing crazy things, and like they didn't represent, they're not like part of the norm. But now they seem to be identifying, the Trump people seem to be identifying more and more with them, or the media seems to be lumping them all in the same category, which is there's a danger to, I mean, all this extremism is seems dangerous to me, and I think I have a philosophical bent and a personality bent towards violence prevention, and it's really the situation is really bothering me because I kind of have this general idea that if you research cults a lot, you'll find that cults don't just appear in like Jonestown and Charles Manson. Those types of things are like the traditional cults, but then there are cult-like mentalities that use the exact same structure and frameworks, but they're not in a cult. So they're like, you can see these same frameworks in multi-level marketing or abusive relationships or political groups, and in many different situations, in workplaces, And I think America, with its political, a lot of America's political groups seem to be displaying symptoms of cult-like behavior, and one of the main ones I would say is actually lack of sleep. Like Americans get on average an hour less sleep than they did 50 years ago or something like that, which is detrimental. I mean, cults will actively deprive people of sleep. That's one of the main markers of cult-like behavior, and I think Americans are just doing it to themselves. But like, black and white thinking, us and them thinking, like, kind of dehumanizing the other side and only consuming information that like a cult will say. Like Jonestown probably, it almost, I know they did. They said like only consume information from us. You can get the newsletter from us. Don't listen to the outside world. Scientology says that as well. But the media is doing that to us naturally. We're doing it to ourselves. Like we're kind of indoctrinating ourselves into a cult, naturally. And it's I'm interested in why we're doing this, because people tend to go into cults when they are at a crossroads in their life and their foundations are shaky. So when they're, they just got out of a divorce, or they're moved to a different side of the country and their family isn't there, they don't have the structures in place. And they're like, they left their religion, that's when we start to go in cults. And I wonder if we're so destabilized as a nation that we're just kind of naturally indoctrinating ourselves.
Right.
And I'd love to hear what you'd have to say from an integral perspective, or just a Bruce perspective, because you are not the speakerhead for Integral. You are your own human being with your own opinions.
Yeah, I am watching it with a lot of concern, and it's an interesting thing to learn to navigate. In a private discussion with some friends the other day, we were talking about Biden's recent speech that was a little bit polarizing. There's the whole meme going around of him against that red background, and what was the intention behind, that color scheme and his language. And I was on the side that overall his speech was not that bad. Not as bad as like somebody like Tucker Carlson is representing it. Right? I feel like Tucker Carlson is presenting a very one-sided and to me deliberately distorting interpretation of what Biden actually said. But I really do feel that he didn't maybe make enough distinctions, and he contributed to the kind of conflation that you were just talking about, where it does easily settle into easy us and thems that are convenient, and where there's not a distinction made between, for instance, people who voted for Trump and people who marched on the Capitol. It's not all the same group. They don't all feel the same, right? And I just think about my mother. It actually is, it was a little bit hard for me to take, because she raised me in a very new age, spiritual, shamanic kind of household. And she was always very progressive and earth oriented and everything. But in her later years, she's come to embrace Trump, and she really likes and respects him. And she believes the whole narrative about him as a patriot and all of these things, which to me are not believable, but to her they are. But just, not to get into the personal detail, but just saying that she's somebody who respects him thinks he has good intentions for the country overall and voted for him. And she might even vote for him again, but she is not somebody who is a radical or who would storm the Capitol, right?
Mm.
And so you can't just conflate those things. I do think there's a lot of destabilization happening with demographic shifts, um, the explosion of the different kinds of media, and we don't have a way that, we don't have a filter for all the information that's coming through. And I think there's just been a great deal of destabilization where people in those uncertain zones are reaching for what seems sure and reliable.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's contributing to some of the dynamics that we're seeing, and really a willing closing in around something that seems to offer uh, strength and surety. And uh, in those cases, often the green postmodern nuance of wanting to hold multiple perspectives in the middle of all the chaos actually seems wishy-washy to a lot of people who are looking for security and they're looking for stability. And I think that's one reason why Trump appeals, is that he doesn't give you more undecidedness. He gives you, something solid to hold on to. And, I think a lot of people are attracted to that, even though, in my opinion, that's not what we need to navigate the landscape we're in, but it's an understandable reaction.
So, Bruce, there's two things on my mind. And the first thing is that you mentioned green, which is the stages of development. And I do want to have you explain that, but I want to set that aside for now because of what you said about your mother. It relates to me a lot because my father is he's very, very interested in conspiracy theories, not the Trump ones, but I would say less believable than the QAnon Trump ones for most people. And I also face the same dilemma because I love him. He's been like the best father. He's been an excellent father to me my whole life. And even like the conspiracy theories really helped me because, when he would tell me things, and so I would, I guess the general idea behind conspiracy theories is like, don't trust the government, don't trust authority. And so having that embedded in my mind from such a young age really helped because it was like, oh, I don't actually have to just believe whatever the government tells me. Like I should actually do my own research and or any authority figure that claims to have the right answers. But on the other hand, we still get in a lot of disagreements because I try not to, but like he wants me to live my life in certain ways that I don't want to live my life in, and he believes that it's for my health and my wellness, and he's coming from a place of like fear for my safety and my health, and I'm coming from a place of not wanting to do certain things that he takes certain medications or whatever that he wants me to take, and like all sorts of different stuff. So I'm wondering how you connect with your mother despite having these kind of divisive obvious political divides between you two.
Sometimes we've had some conflicts and we're actually very close. So they've been unusual for us to have those conflicts, and we've navigated away from them for the most part. But it was difficult because if I start talking about certain things, or if I start bringing in certain perspectives, her eyes will start flashing because she'll think that I'm about to say that some perspective is superior to her perspective. And so I'm very careful. I don't go there and I don't do that. And I try to meet her as much where she is as I can.
Yeah.
Without any, patronizing or anything like that, but really, because I know she's a bright person and she's coming from her own set of convictions and moral concerns and love for the world and for people and for me. So I just try to forward those things in my thought, and where we can get into some nuanced discussion. I've actually found she surprises me with the degree of thought and insight that is behind some of the perspectives that she's holding. It's not just like a stupid person picking it up off the street. She's really thought through a lot of stuff. So it gives me new respect when I meet her there. But but also, if we get past the side drawing, where I'm on this side and that side,
Mm-hmm.
and we really begin to look at, what are the underlying values and drives that are motivating us towards our various perspectives, we often find a lot of common ground around those motivations and drives, and
Mm-hmm.
connect at that level, even if the unpacking of it goes in different directions. We can recognize a shared heart, around a lot of that, and it's been helpful. It's like I do with my dad also. He voted, he usually votes conservative. He voted for Bush. He voted for Trump. He was disappointed in Trump, but he still voted that way.
Mm-hmm.
But often, yeah, I found that I've been able to connect with him when I'm able to see the limitations of my own so-called side in a way that he can resonate with, that he sees that I see that limitation. And then he's able to hear me talk about the limitation I see on that side and the desire for something that actually transcends the limitations of both of those things. And in being able to articulate that, to own the weaknesses of my own position, and to see the strengths in his, and to look for horizon beyond both, that's usually where we're able to meet and amicably agree to disagree, while we, are able to resonate on, more emotional levels or on values oriented levels, even if the concrete details don't always line up.
Mm. Yeah, I certainly try to do that a lot. My dad is yeah, I think and I actually don't disbelieve like a lot of things he says. Perhaps we believe them in different like for instance, this is not my father, but like you know, two people can take the Bible, for instance, and one person can interpret it completely literally, and the other person can interpret it more metaphorically, or as if it. For me, for instance, I think it has a deep resonance to a human being, and it tells us all about life and our consciousness and society and all these other layers. And like we both believe in the Bible, but we believe in
Mhm.
it in different layers, right? And for my father, I think we have a lot of the same. We both believe in things, like, but I think we use different language. Where yeah, and so I do try to relate to him in a lot of different ways, like, but so for instance, he really believes in like aliens. He's really into
Mhm.
aliens. And uh and but I see aliens as perhaps something like we've had this concept of angels or aliens or jinni, in Arabic cultures for since the beginning of time. Like
Mhm.
it's the voice, perhaps for some people it's the voice of reason, or perhaps some people who are like quote unquote schizophrenic. I'm not denying schizophrenia. It's just like we have different interpretations of schizophrenia throughout time as well. Like maybe it's the voice that speaks in your head, and we do kind of have these ideas of other dimensions existing, and so perhaps there are other dimensions out there that exist. And I don't disbelieve any of these things. I just don't necessarily carry the belief as strongly as my father does. And so
Mhm.
when we talk to each other, like I might say that somebody is really emotionally intelligent, and my dad might say that somebody is really high vibration, but we mean the same
Right.
thing, and so
Right.
I can just connect with him by speaking his language when it comes to these really specific concrete um actions. Like I mean, do you have any advice on how to handle these things by any chance?
I don't know if I do. Yeah, it's been hard for me to navigate some of that stuff too. Um, I think, you know, for me, it's just connecting at the level of our love and our shared humanity. And, it works for me. I'm not going to do anything that's going to hurt you, but I still think it works for me. And, you know, pretty basic, simple stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really uh, there are layers to that, and yeah, you can. you can often use the language of, of somebody you disagree with in a way that makes sense within your own frame and makes sense within their frame. And you know that you're not actually from your frame saying exactly the same thing, but you're saying something that is functionally equivalent within their frame. And so there's like a technical language around that maybe we can get into some of those kinds of distinctions later. But just very practically, I think that works very well. My friend Layman on the Integral Stage, he talks about having a very difficult aunt. I think it's an aunt who likes to talk about hellfire and all this kinds of stuff when she meets him. And he doesn't really relate to that, but he will talk about the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, he's meaning, a certain integral spiritual apex principle. And she's meaning, Jesus and Yahweh. But he'll just talk about how he loves the Lord and how he looks to the Lord for answers. And she totally resonates with that. And they have nice conversations. So he just, uses the language. And in my own ways, I've done those kinds of things too. Not exactly that, because I don't have exactly that kind of religious group around me. But yeah, it's just using language skillfully that can bridge multiple world spaces at the same time if you're able to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think for me the core is honesty. Like I still like I suppose I don't think it's ever okay to lie, but like I think Layman probably does genuinely believe in the Lord, but it's just for him it just appears in maybe a different way than it does for some other people. And so he can call up the Lord with, I think, and be very genuine about it as well.
Exactly. Yeah. He that's what he's saying, is that he's saying it from a real heartfelt place and he means what he's saying, but he also knows at the same time that what he's thinking about as the Lord is probably not the same as what she's thinking about as the Lord. But if you suspend it in that as if, it's surprising as you go along the kinds of resonances and insights that you can both give each other.
Yeah.
If you enter that that shared resonant journey together.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad has an incredible spiritual depth. Like he meditates every day and he'll like talk about he'll be in a presence. Like he has the ability to stay in the present and appreciate the present, and that comes with, can come from sitting on a mountaintop and meditating, but also he's just discovered it in his own way. And like,
right.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the keys to it is like, I'm on Reddit sometimes, and like a lot, I'll be honest. And like I see people who there's this Reddit subreddit called QAnon casualties, where like people's parents or whatever have joined QAnon, and it seems like the only coping strategy that they have is to cut these people off. But for me, like I've been dealing with it my whole life. Not dealing with it, I've been living with it. I've been experiencing it my whole life, and I would never want to cut my father off. And it's like, well, I think part of it is like understanding that these people are there's an underlying emotion here. Like Layman's aunt is scared that he's going to go to hell, and she's really scared for him, and underneath that is love. Like so there is and he's resonating. He's found a way to resonate with her love, I would say.
Right.
And which is really beautiful. And like I think it depends how controlling these people are being, obviously, but like oftentimes we can find emotions like fear, anger, sadness type emotions that these people are experiencing by maybe asking them, and then kind of just resonate with those emotions. And like sometimes the chatter doesn't matter as much.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So if it's okay with you, I want to continue to again, you mentioned green before, which is a stage of development, I suppose, and in spiral dynamics, I believe you're referring to.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is like second nature to integralists to just speak in these terms, but the most people don't have this vocabulary available, but it's really, really important, I think, that we kind of gain this shared understanding of what this is, this vocabulary. So I would love for you to explain spiral dynamics.
I was just talking to someone about spiral dynamics. I was teaching class on it, and then I handed it over to her to begin teaching. And she's taught it a couple times now. And she was just reporting to me what an amazing experience it was, that now that she was really feeling fluid with the material, it took her a couple times of teaching it to really digest it and make it into her own class, you know. But how energized very, very different people were all by this content. And just as an example, you know, in the class, for instance, was a kind of a rural mountain man with a big old rugged beard, and he's got some kind of liberal values, but he's very down to earth and pro-gun and all this kind of stuff. Then there's another person in there who was very radical feminist and you know, progressive political thinker and very urban, but with some interest in shamanism and things like that. And you know, another person who's very much into the trans rights and all that stuff. So there are very different people in the class, and all of them were moving in their own world spaces and navigating values differences. You know, all of them are encountering that in their different workplaces and world spaces and you know, family lives and all of that. And so they found through this spiral dynamics class a way to understand some of the different values that inform people's worldviews and decision making and commitments and things like that, that just clarifies the field a lot, because you see all these tensions between different groups and everybody's talking each other down and silencing each other and usually polarizing around one or two perspectives and denying or downplaying the others. And so spiral dynamics is one way of looking at a spectrum of value systems that seem to unfold in a particular order. They're not all available to everyone at once, because usually the ideas and the commitments of one value system grow out of the problems of the previous value system. So there is a value system that you're inhabiting, and it fulfills you, it serves different purposes for you, and it helps you orient. But there are also always limitations to our worldviews and to our value systems, and eventually you come up against contradictions and things that your own approach can't really handle that well, and that usually puts you into a crisis mode, and then you find a way out of it. So spiral dynamics maps a series of values perspectives. It's bigger than just values. It's kind of worldview frames in a way, and each one grows out of the next, and it's usually out of the shortcomings, the limitations of the next, or in order to deal with new complexities that weren't present when the original value system emerged. So just, I won't go over the whole thing, but very easily we can recognize you know, for instance, the spectrum between red, which would be kind of tribal or you know, honor-based, strength-based, but kind of individualistic and egotistical, claiming your own power kind of perspective. Then out of that field of warriors, right, eventually you need to be able to organize them to serve a larger purpose. That's the value of blue, of traditionalism. You gather the warriors from the different tribes and you unite them around a single vision, a single understanding that they can have kinship beyond the blood connections or whatever. You can begin to build a civilization on rule of law, on shared commitment to spiritual principles. So that's the whole emergence of all of the different traditional religious kingdoms, you know. All of those grew out of taming the excesses of the wild warrior tribes and gathering them together into a common purpose, into a shared traditional community, right? And there's a whole focus on belonging and law and making a commitment to not only to your brother or sister of the tribe, or even just but to principles, right? That you're committing to love of neighbor, or you're committing to, the one God above all, that unifies, right? But then eventually that can run into, different limitations, especially if you find that if it's organized around kind of mythic belief and conformity to tradition and standards. The more rational thinking develops, the more that you move out of concrete operational thinking and into formal operational thinking, and you begin to do more independent logical analysis. Some of those things don't hold up anymore, right? You can't justify them. And so that's where the orange value system emerges, where it's turning much more around kind of authentic insight through rational process that's not just based on reception of traditional knowledge. Blue is the reception of traditional knowledge, and the interest is in the conformity of the group. With orange, there's much more sticking true to lines of intellectual inquiry and scientific research, and the whole scientific industrial culture emerges out of that and consolidates around various different versions of orange around the world. It doesn't show up exactly the same way in different countries, but it's generally turning around the same basic principles of individualism, of rights, of rational thought, things like that. Then in that context where there's a big blooming of abundance and growth and all kinds of things that can happen through, that liberation of thinking in orange, it can create situations that again begin to become too much for orange to handle. And still orange is looking for the truth, and it's looking for it's following rationality as far as it can go in science, but eventually, you come up into, I think, enough complexity of the environment and enough differences in perspectives that you begin to see even the orange worldview relativized against others, and that you begin to see unconscious drives that were informing it. And you open up to needing to navigate and finding ways to navigate a greater plurality of perspectives that do not marginalize certain perspectives in the way that the orange value may do if it's only relying on rationality and it can't see any value in religious truths, right? But gradually you begin to open up to, okay, there maybe is value here. And actually, in following only this path, we lost some of the gifts that the other way had. So anyway, that there's an opening up into a greater sensitivity to perspective and a greater you could say a greater sensitivity to the unconscious dynamics of power that tend to underprivilege or even marginalize groups of people. So green rallies around how can we recognize those who've been driven to the shadow or driven under the system, who are neglected by the system. And so green is like an explosion of pluralistic values. But then out of that, there's usually some kind of stagnation, because simple pluralism begins to just like swirl around, but nothing can happen, right? It's hard for people to come together. It's hard for people to generate any cultural forward progress when there's no recognized ground to stand on anymore. And so then that's where the integral model starts to come in, is to honor the plurality and to honor the truth, so that you can begin to build structures that can marshal plurality around shared projects and around shared visions and perspectives, without reducing things to a single dominant view the way previous value systems have done. So that's just an example. It's not the full thing of it. It's pretty complex and a lot to digest, but the idea there, though, is that often politically, looking at what's going on in the news and culturally, It's a big clash between especially blue, orange, and green.
Yeah.
There's the traditionalists who want the Bible and the way things were and to hold on to tradition and all of that. There's the rationalists and the science oriented who want things to be much more focused on what's this worldly and real and provable and demonstrable and aligned again with the insights of science and medicine. It does away with the bullshit, And then there's the green that wants to be sensitive to all the marginalized different groups. It's usually progressive thinking. It usually is trying to highlight racial injustices or expand perspectives around gender and things like that. And the big culture wars that we're experiencing are largely these three groups colliding with each other.
I would say that from my perspective, that first of all, that was excellent. I'm so glad I asked you to explain spiral dynamics, because mine would have been a lot more two-dimensional than yours. But and Elliot talks about this a lot, that it oftentimes we have this idea that we need to climb up the levels, but oftentimes if you're really green, for instance, it doesn't mean that you've really embraced the blue or the orange. Like sometimes you might have skipped one or skipped a couple, and you need to to be a complete person, trademarked, you need to come down and explore every single level really, really well. And so for instance, orange science-based makes a lot of sense, but I've heard orange also described as like capitalism. And so, you go from the traditional regular businesses that kind of fit within a certain model to like, oh, I could tweak this and exploit this part of the system and then kind of make it into my own and make myself money. And then with money, I have power. Maybe that's one of the good or bad power, whatever you choose to do with it. I mean, power is kind of neutral in many ways, but with a lot of greens, it seems like they have all these wonderful ideas about treating humanity properly and raising everyone up in an equal way, but they don't understand how money works. And the fact that you have to, the government can't give us endless money. And, maybe sometimes the best things to do is to start your own business that helps humanity. And for every piece of software you sell, you plant 5 trees or something, there's and also power, the red personal power. To me, it seems like personal power is very much it's very physical. And, there's this typical idea of the Google software programmer who essentially controls a large part of humanity's culture by designing systems that we use every day, but he is emaciated and doesn't treat his body well. And there's a part of his humanity that is missing if he doesn't work on his own personal power, because from my opinion, a lot of these software programmers at the top don't want the power. So they kind of outsource it to an AI or kind of pretend that they aren't in charge of humanity's future. And so it's like, by not taking on the power, you don't not take on the power, you just pretend you don't take on the power, and then you don't use it properly because you kind of don't want the responsibility. And this is just, I mean, I'm criticizing a straw man here, but so I think it is important to, for me anyway, from my own personal story, I kind of skipped the blue level, and I'm still not a completely structured person, but I realized a few years ago that it was kind of a big realization for me, and it was kind of triggered by I was really into Jordan Peterson. Now, I think I've grown past him, but no, not past him. I've integrated parts of him, and then now but I realized that tradition was really, really important, and it was there for a reason. And sometimes we need to grow past traditions, and I think women's education is great, and we should keep that. But some traditions are there for a very, very good reason, and we shouldn't just act like they're stupid and old and archaic and get rid of them, because sometimes they keep a culture and a humanity together.
Yeah.
There's one more thing that I wanted to address, which is and I understand why you did it, but to me, purple is so interesting.
Mm.
The purple level is the one at the bottom, and I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit on that.
Yeah, very bottom is beige.
Beige, sorry.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, no, but you know, it's almost there's not very much you can say about beige. That's strictly body-based survival,
Mhm.
right? Um, we don't encounter that very much though, unless it's like the infant, um, where the main thing is just feed me, and there's not a lot of interaction going on. Or, um, but for purple, um, you know, one of the one of the exercises that I used to do in that class, and I've shared it on some forums before, uh, as an exercise for myself, just to play with it, with spiral dynamics when I was first learning of it. I used to ask myself to think about days, ways, and forays. And the days would be to remember when you inhabited that value space. The ways is how does that still show up now? And the forays would be any times that you can recall where you did a deliberate effort to step into a different value space to try to experiment there. What's that like? You know, if you've been in Orange all the time, but you want to go sit in a church, you know, and see what's there, or you've been in the church all the time, but you know, you want to break out and go to a, you know, humanist club or something like that, right? Um, those are the forays where you're wanting to step into a different um, sphere and experience that. So thinking about that, you know, the purple. I mean, I don't know that we even have that many groups that are strictly at purple anymore. Um, Most of them, even if like a lot among many of the tribes, they span many levels. They're not just purple, but purple is very much focused um, on shared identity with the tribe and the group. It's kind of prior to a strong, clear ego emerging. The self is much more participatory and part informed by the overall tribe and group. There's a lot of you could say magical thinking in terms of relating to the world in and as the forms of different kinds of intelligences and powers, and the whole of your life and practices to um, find different resonances with those powers and be in harmony and relationship with those things. Um, and yeah, it's a different level and different experience of causality. Um, but yeah, it's a tribal, communal, very communally oriented, um, and there's a lot that's very nurturant about it. But there's also some of the nurturants that can feel stifling, and that's where the red begins to push out, and to begin to experience its own um, initial independence from
Mm,
that collectivity of purple.
mm.
But you know, I was thinking about like the days, ways, and forays. The reason I brought that up is, you know, I was thinking about like reflecting on uh, you know, there's a belief that, you know, at purple that usually objects are imbued with the power, and you can take on that power by taking that thing on yourself, right? And I remember when I was very young, I loved Ultraman. I don't know if you remember Ultraman from the Japanese TV show.
No, I don't.
You know, Japanese superhero, silver and red robot, you know, and he could go like this and shoot lasers from his hands. And, you know, when I was a little kid, I really loved Ultraman. And I wanted to be like him. So I broke open an etch a sketch and I took out all the mercury and I covered myself with the mercury, which is probably what happened to me and why I'm like this now. Um, all this brain damage. But I covered myself in that silver mercury, and I felt that I was going to take on that power, because that's that purple kind of thinking. I can participate in the power, so that by having the silver, I am that being, you know.
Yeah. That's incredible, first of all. Matt is a header. Um, wow. Purple is so interesting to me because just like you said, about taking on the properties of things. I like Carl Jung, and there's a Jungian who was underneath him called Marie von Franz, who was like his best student, and she would talk about
Yeah.
how before she was a student, she would do this alchemical process, maybe when she was 10 or 12 or something like that, and she would try to transform. I don't exactly remember what it was, water into gold or something like that. And she realized that afterwards that she was actually creating a transformative process in her own self to again and again with a good helping of magical thinking as an adult to get herself ready for what Jung was going to teach her before, and this was before she met Jung. And I have found in myself that magical thinking, maybe it died down when I was in my teens because of maybe peer pressure or something like that. But as an adult, magical thinking has resurfaced, maybe with a more rational bent, somewhat, but also somewhat not. And it's helped me enormously. Like I don't know if you're familiar with, like, I'm sure you are, like Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich or The Secret or any of those manifesting type ideas. I have this kind of theory in my head that you can manifesting works really, really well, and from a rational layer of reality, you can say that, well, of course, I'm self-hypnotizing. I'm training my own mind to look for opportunities and to think of ideas because I know, and if you're not familiar with it in the audience, you say, okay, I'm going to make $100,000 this year, and you write it down and you say it out loud and you imbue it with emotion. And the emotion is knowing, it's like an emotion of knowing that it is already yours and gratitude that you have it. And then to go deeper into it, you might notice that something comes up in your emotions that says like, oh, I don't have this. Why don't I have this desperation? And then you can just kind of watch those emotions of desperation and not having and lack, and you can, like, you don't ignore them, you don't push them down, but you can feel where they are, and maybe you can find out where they come from. Like when you were a kid, you were somehow convinced that you wouldn't be rich, and so now you feel that it is not possible, or like this isn't real, and but I have found that there has to be, for me, some element of magical thinking in order to harness the faith completely. And faith, I think, is something that this orange level rationality based mindset can't really use, because if we're all scientific, then we can't have faith that the universe will give us what we want. And so we can't use that faith to get what we want. And so so one level of my manifesting theory is based in reality, but another level is just that I genuinely think that it seems to be true to me that if I tell the truth to people and I genuinely know that I will get something and have gratitude for it, I seem to get what I want. And so I don't know how that works, but it appears to work for everything that is really truly important to me. And so yeah, I've had a wonderful success integrating purple into my life. And I wonder if you have any similar experiences with purple, not necessarily with manifesting.
Yes, I have, encountered and experienced, with, I actually do a little bit of the manifesting thinking myself, but, that's a big thing for my mother. She always tries to teach us that and do that.
What a good mother you have. Wow.
Yeah, she's wonderful. Yeah, what the way you describe that, of course, you're kind of using rationality to describe it, and even using rationality to bracket out, right? And so there's like a pre-rational, and then there's rational, and then there's trans-rational. And trans-rational can look like pre-rational, and it's not necessarily pre-rational, but it can make room for what looks like pre-rational, and it can willingly hold the rational in suspension in order to enter into the experiment, right? And I think that's what you described very beautifully, right? And you don't necessarily know what's going to happen or how it's going to happen, and you recognize that there could be rational ways to do it, but maybe we don't have the ability to do it, but that doing the experiment, it bears fruit, right? And yeah, so I've definitely experienced that. For me, I mean, you could call it the level of intuition or whatever, uh, but I've noticed, especially in recent years, uh, some part of me is coming forward where I just have to allow for a clearing, and then a holistic showing will show up in that space that will tell me yes or no, something's going to happen. And it's not rationally thought out. Um, I don't know why yes or no, it's not going to happen is the case, but I've learned to just open up into that, into a kind of participatory resonance with the field and the whole situation, and let go of the machinations of the ego that wants to figure it out or pin it down or chart it out. Um, and then usually that download will happen, and then I feel able to act from that. And so for me, that's a kind of purplish participation in the overall field and experience, that my rational mind can't necessarily explain, but I do see it working. And I do usually see that those global insights are right. When I know that that's going to happen or not going to happen, then I watch it. It really turns out that way, right? So I've learned to trust that. Um, and yeah, so I think that's an example of that. And there's a lot of people who talk about the more that we moved into kind of the rational ego, the more that we lost a lot of our immediate intuitive intelligence and participation and resonance with the larger field of life, and that there are certain things that people who have lived with certain indigenous groups, they seem to be able to pick up on things and to know things that we rationally can't really explain how they're getting that information. And I think rationally, one way we can talk about it is that whenever you move to another level or stage, it's not simply an advancement, it's a trimming off. There's a focusing and a narrowing in on certain options, and you develop those in certain ways. But in developing them, you lose access to certain other parts of yourself, which may have been viable parts of your intelligence and way of interacting with the world, that gets bracketed out or narrowed out or shadowed or buried, when you move to another level. And I think part of the, one of the ways that Wilbur has talked about moving from the green pluralistic point of view, which is the value, accepting multiple values and being very sensitive to power and all of those things, but often in a way that's not necessarily very embodied.
What does
And
it mean to be embodied?
what's that?
What does it mean to be embodied?
Well, this might explain that in a way. That one of the metaphors that Wilbur uses for moving into an integral stage is the centaur. And that is the human body with, or the human upper torso with the horse body. The mermaid is also a symbol of that, where there is the human being with all of its rational intelligence, but it's rooted in that deeper evolutionary embodied somatic intelligence that's been built over millions of years, right? Or hundreds of thousands of years or whatever, depends on the species you're stacking yourself on top of. But in any event, that's one thing that Jung said. He said that in his defense of the belief in the collective unconscious, is that our body with all of its organs is like a museum of this vast evolutionary journey of physical biological experiments. And the little beta carotene glove that was invented by a prokaryote in the oceans a long time ago is still in your eyes, and it's helping you to see.
Yep.
Right. And and you've got a vertebra. Our whole body is that museum of all of those discoveries over a long time. And he says the psyche too has all of these sediments laid down by different ways of being and knowing from our entire evolutionary history, and that we have access to parts of that. But there's probably a lot more that's there, just like there's a whole deep history in the body. And so the centaur phase, when you're moving into being a centaur, you begin to notice, you become much more aware of your unconscious and your repressive defenses. And as you begin to work through those things, you can find where your body has developed muscular armoring and you've engaged in repression in different ways. And often that it comes at the cost of having full access to your somatic intelligence and your full embodied being. We're usually pretty armored, neurotic kind of people in modern society. We learn to push away instinctual drives and things and try to focus on very narrow things, but not often in a very intelligent way. So our body ends up being stifled.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, as they move into like existential phases of life where they begin to question what has everything been about and who am I, there's a whole deep opening up to the experiential field of the body again and beginning to learn to listen to it and rely on it and connect to it in ways that maybe you haven't felt in a long time. You know, I know in psychotherapy and you know, even just in my daily experience, you know, when you ask somebody, okay, feel your body, or what are you feeling right now? A lot of people, especially very orange rational people, they can't even connect to that.
Yep.
They can't tell you what they're feeling. And so
Yep.
that's what it means to be disembodied. So it's bringing back in that deep connection. And, you know, in one of the kind of, it's a green bordering integral, you know, technology of David Bohm, physicist David Bohm, who developed a dialogue method. But one of the insights, you know, that he has is that this body has a natural proprioception. It knows what it's doing as it's doing it. You don't even have to make an effort to track it, right? But thought doesn't propriocept. Our thinking moves in a way that we're not often aware of what our thinking is doing. And so we divide the world up and we categorize the world and we make judgments without even knowing that the mind has done that. And then we just perceive the picture back as if that's reality.
Yeah, like you know, if I'm on Reddit a lot, or like I even into certain subreddits or certain social media, my thoughts will change. And it's not until quite fairly recently, in the last year, 2 years maybe, that I've realized that, oh, because I've been on this subreddit, my thoughts are different. Like, you know, I am on these subreddits that make me angry, and then all the time I'm like looking for ways that people can make me angry or whatever it is. And before then it was just like, oh, everything's normal. Because
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, just the one little piece I wanted to say with
yeah.
that is that in doing the dialogue process, he discovered it really became very important for people to be able to propriocept their thought and to really see their own thought patterns. They first had to reconnect to their own interoception, to their own feeling of their bodies. And as we become more integrated that way, it becomes easier to become aware of the overall movement of our thinking and our conditioning. So it's just it's a whole unfolding movement.
For any listeners out here who want to see if they can feel into their bodies, do you have a quick exercise or just a small task that you can give them to like feel into their bodies and see how well they can do it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different methods. Some of them are just like using the breath to sweep through the body, and then you can usually see what you can feel and what you can't feel. You know, so I mean, one way is just to name it. You know, if I just said, feel your, you know, feel your fingernail area on the, you know, the ring finger of your left hand. Are you only imagining that as a picture, or are you feeling anything in that place?
Yeah.
Right. And you could just like randomly go around the body, you know, feel behind your right kneecap. Right. Yeah. And you can go through like that, or just practice breathing. Just, as you take in a breath, breathe in, and then just feel it move through the head, down through the neck, through the body, take it through your waist, down your legs, down into your feet, and just like do a sweeping breath, just like up and down like that. Or you can just imagine yourself as a little point of light, and like, imagine yourself like a little point of light, of awareness, of attention right at your forehead. And then just let that start moving around and see if you can just like begin to feel and explore your body as this point that's just moving around in different parts of yourself.
There was an exercise that we did at the guy called Jesse McKay runs these amazing retreats. I believe they're integral retreats, but also other types. And one exercise that he did was he said he got us in the beginning of every retreat to do a full body meditation scan. And it lasted for a couple minutes, from your toes to your head and just everything you can feel. And then afterwards he said, now throughout this whole retreat, 5 days long, I want you to try to stay 50% in your body and 50% in the outside world. And every half hour, every time we changed the task or whatever at hand, or just randomly, he would say, and we're in our bodies. And one exercise that he did that was incredible was he would sit us down in front of a person, and we would just watch them. Most people ended up eye gazing into the other person, but we would feel how our bodies felt with this person in front of us. And then we would change chairs and then look at the next person, feel how our bodies felt with this person in front of us. And for me, it was vastly different. And I felt myself like I've been noticing myself doing this more and more, but like connecting with things that are not that they aren't telling me, like kind of finding things out about them that they weren't necessarily talking about. And I kind of on a separate topic from what you were talking about before, like in reference to what you were saying before, I do notice myself noticing things in other people that I don't necessarily have a basis for, or information that they haven't given me, and it seems to be almost always correct when I talk about it, but sometimes it's not appropriate to talk about. And
right.
And I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that you have this experience as well. Yeah. For our listeners out there, one of the best ways I think to develop this skill, or actually just a total necessity, I think, for especially for teenage girls, is this book called The Gift of Fear. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's an excellent book, and it's about how, in kind of reference to what you were saying before, how we oftentimes don't listen to our bodies. And it's a book, I would say it has a lot of women's stories. I think he writes other books that are more from male perspectives or different perspectives, but like man or woman, this is an excellent book. And essentially it's a lot of stories of Gavin de Becker is the author, and he's a security expert. He does security for like when a Saudi prince comes to America, he's his security team. Like, he organizes everything. And so he's very into security, obviously. And he wrote these books, and like all the stories are of women who have had very, very, terrible things happen to them by strangers. Rape, like I think mostly rape. And in every single interview he does with them, they were talking to this person, they had a bad feeling, and they ignored it. And I think our society has, especially because of social issues or how women are, biologically aligned, women especially tend to push down. I think we are kind of taught to push down our instincts, and then just to kind of go with whatever society wants us to do. Whereas like oftentimes, there's a story in particular where a woman goes into her apartment complex, and the guy comes up from down below, which is the laundry room. So that's the first red flag. And she realizes this and says, "Oh, hi, where are you going?" She goes, "4th floor." He goes, "Oh, I know the people on the 5th floor." And she knows the people on the 5th floor. And she's like, "I don't think these people would be hanging out with him, but whatever." She doesn't want to like cause trouble. he walks up with her. He says, "Can I carry your bag?" She goes, "Oh no." And then he insists. And so like she gets kind of weird, but she's weirded out, but she goes with it. And this whole time her body is telling her that this is wrong. Like this is scary, uncomfortable, but she's very polite. And then he does a like, "Oh, what do you think? I'm going to hurt you or something," you know? And so there's this thing that predators will do where they will make it you have to be the rude one. You have to be the bitch in the situation. Like, because in this point she has to say, "Yeah, I do think you're going to hurt me. Fuck off." Like, you have to be a bitch in this situation. And like, if she were to do that, he probably would have left, because predators look for prey. They don't look for other predators. And so, and you know, who knows? Like, I'm not victim blaming, whatever. But and then, you know, he goes up, he gets to her floor, says, "Can I grab a glass of water?" She says yes, and then terrible things happen. But like, this book is amazing, because it's just like, and I would highly recommend, like, if you know any, especially young women, but really anyone, like, give it to them, because this book is all about listening to your fear. And I would say it's helped me out of situations that would have otherwise gone really badly. And so I can definitely attribute this book to a lot. But it's also helped me on my developmental journey of like, I think that was the first time, and I was in a much more rational space at this time. Like, it's the first time that it helped me to learn to listen to myself.
Yeah. I think that's so important, you know, and we don't, I mean, we live by schedules, you know, we don't even listen to when our body is hungry or what it's telling us to eat. You know, we let external situations, you know, structure even our intake of food. And I think we undermine our body's intelligence by following mechanical routines like that. Yeah, I think that's really important. It's a little bit more formal kind of book. I don't know how many people would resonate with it, but I really like Judith Blackstone's work. She has a book called The Empathic Ground, but it contains a lot of exercises of learning to connect to and feel your body in different ways. And it's really a beautiful and a powerful way that she opens it up. She has this overall process that she calls realization process, but in doing those exercises in her presentation, you know, and she uses it as a therapist, but she says that the deeper she's gone into it, the more it's enabled her to feel not only her own body, but to feel what's going on in the person with her and to get intelligence from that. And as a therapist, you know, already we learn from countertransference that, you know, we track our own responses and we track any kind of feelings that might be coming up in us that could be countertransference feelings from our relationship with that other person. But she says doing this process that she's been able to do with this full body awareness that opens up into awareness of the outer space around her, ultimately she's become very sensitive to and attuned to other people's bodies such that she can feel simultaneously what's going on with them and what's going on with her. And it doesn't mean her interpretation of what's going on with them is the right one. Just like we might feel something in our body, but we can't know for sure. We interpret it. There could be things that we don't see in it yet. So she's just interpreting what she feels in them. But it's opened up this whole field of empathic connection for her that she tries to teach to others. So it's a beautiful book, a very simple, slim book, but a lot of good exercises in there for really developing that sensitivity. Because in the school that I'm in, our student body is 90% women. A lot of women are attracted to this field, and most of the instructors are women. Almost all of the students are women. And so it's very common for me to hear from the women who are joining this program, who happen to be very sensitive people, that they pick up a lot of stuff. And they didn't know before beginning to go into this program and really process a lot of things how to differentiate what they were picking up, which was their own and which was somebody else's, because they were so openly, empathically resonant with others that they could pick up things from the field, but they would take responsibility for it. And maybe it wasn't really coming from them. And so gradually, through self-work and the kinds of processes that we explore in our program, they feel that they're able to begin to differentiate, but that it was actually a disorienting and even sometimes debilitating thing that they experienced in themselves of being too open and sensitive, and sometimes taking responsibility for or ownership for feelings and states and signals and impulses and things like that that actually weren't theirs, but they couldn't clearly differentiate.
I think I have the same issue. Now I want to ask you another piece of advice. So I've been asking a lot of influencers that I know how they deal with negative comments, because it seems I really haven't gotten a very good answer. I've gotten one pretty decent answer. But essentially, I posted a video online. It was like a TikTok style video, a minute. It was funny. Most people liked it. About 20 people thought I was a terrible person, and there were hate crimes in the background and all sorts of things. I was implying hateful things or something like that. And so I know logically that there's this 0.1% of people who decided, like literally 0.01 or something percent of people who decided to comment and get angry, and everyone else just had a good time and kept on with their lives. But for some reason, I can't help but focus on these negative comments. And even if they were like 50% of comments or something, they weren't. But like, even if I was in the wrong in some way, I would still need help dealing with this. And so I'm wondering if you have any methodologies to deal with negative interactions online.
Yeah. I used to, I don't know, whatever has happened, I used to encounter it a lot more some years ago. I guess I was more active on discussion forums and things like that. And occasionally our videos will get some negative reactions, but for the most part, not. We don't get a lot of interactions at all, actually. But when they do, they're usually pretty positive. There was something, when we were approaching this talk that I was thinking of talking about, that would be a way to frame that. I don't want to go on with something too involved, but it actually deals with that in a way. So we opened up, talking about, differences in perspective and navigating those things and values and all of that. And yeah, I'm weighing how much I want to open up this can of worms.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. One of my early interests was in, navigating. I came out of a Christian environment and began to look into other religious paths, and I became interested in navigating that space between religious worldviews and the different ways that they relate to each other. And simple breakdown, is either exclusivism, where my way is right, your way is wrong, you're going to hell, whatever. Inclusivism, which is you've got some truths, I've got the bigger truth, but I can make room for you, and you're welcome. There's a lot of people who do that. And then there's pluralism, which says, okay, you've got your truth, I've got my truth. Let's just, make peace. I won't put my truth on you. You don't put your truth on me. That's pluralism, pretty much. And then integral would be to say it's short-sighted and it's demeaning to approaches if you do the inclusive thing, where you try to absorb them all in your view and assume you're on the top and everybody else is under you. There's a lot, there's a lot of movements that were well-meaning, but they ended up subordinating a lot of other views. Pluralism leads to just fragmentation, and there's not a lot of ability to really move towards collective action or anything in that area, or mutually generative insight. So it aims for an integrative pluralism where it does recognize that there are differences and it recognizes that there's areas of sameness. One of the ways that I've more lately framed that is with this idea of co-presence or kind of a holographic model. And do you know how like the holographic photographs, how they work? Where,
I think I do, but can you explain?
Yeah, it's a photographic plate where there's a different layers to it, but basically when you shine light through it, obviously you can make a three-dimensional image out of it. And if you cut up the holographic plate and you shine light through any individual piece, you're still going to get the whole picture. So it's not like you cut it up and you like, if you cut up a photograph, you've just got the leg, or you just got the arm. You cut up the holographic thing and you just have a piece of it. The whole picture's in each piece. No matter how you cut it up, it's going to be the bigger the piece you have, the more detail is going to be there, but the full outline of the thing is going to be in every single piece, right? And so every part contains the whole, and the whole contains every part, right? And so different physicists have been looking at the universe in that way and thinking about how reality may be organized in some ways along those lines. And whether physically that turns out to be absolutely the case in a universal way, it started really making sense to me, following certain different philosophers' work and my own exploration, including even in Christian theology, the theology of the Trinity, that every part contains the whole, and then the whole contains all the parts. If you begin to really take that on board, then, I contain in me the multiple worldviews, right? And every worldview does that, and so if each of us can see each other as containing the whole, but showing up in unique ways, right? That whatever way that your culture is doing it, aspects of the whole are manifesting in a particular way and with particular strengths. But the deeper you go into anyone who's done this deeply, if they get to know a culture or get to know a religion, for the most part, the deeper they go, they begin to find resonances with what's already familiar to them. And you find that while it looks like a radically alien territory from the very beginning, the deeper you go into it, you also find so much that you already had in your own tradition, but maybe in a different form. And there's so many accounts nowadays after the 60s and 70s of a lot of people leaving Western traditions to join Asian traditions, for instance, and they go very deep in those traditions. Then they discover, wow, now that I'm really deep here, I actually see that was present in my home tradition all along, but I couldn't recognize it, So there's this mutuality, this shared mutuality, right? That if you can begin to operate from that perspective, where you're not assuming automatic otherness, but that you're assuming mutual inclusion, that shows up uniquely for every person, that shifts the relational field. So the reason I went through all of that is a friend of mine, he wrote a fun little article called How to Be a Meta-Ideological Chad.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's developed some techniques, but in part he was basing it on some of my old papers, and he's also on some of Layman's papers, and then he developed some of his own unique things. But one of the things that he's wanting to develop there is a meta-ideological Chad is a person who is able to move into different ideological spaces, but in a way that is so deeply attentive to and resonant to and making an effort to understand from within any one of the ideological positions that they will recognize him or her as one of themselves. But more than that, this is what he calls, instead of a steel man, he calls it the titanium man, where you not only want to take on their perspective, but reflect it back to them in an expanded way. so that not only will they say yes to what you're mirroring back, but you're recontextualizing their position within a field that maybe they haven't considered before, right? So it's, he goes through a lot of techniques. If you want a link to that article, it's a lot of fun. And he talks about different techniques for doing these kinds of things and moving in and out of ideological spaces in order to really, the deeper you go into communion with whatever ideological space is, you're going to discover things about yourself and you're going to change in the process. But you might also foster growth within that new context by not only steel manning their position, but titanium manning their position, which is to say yes and to be able to say yes with enough clarity that they recognize themselves in that yes, but then they can also discover a new context around the yes that maybe hadn't been showing up in their considerations, right? So that's an overall integral move, is to continually try to reveal the connections that, whenever someone's taking a position or maybe even a polarized position, it's always linked to all kinds of other things, but those are implicit, those are in shadow, those are not forwarded. And so you can take a stand in that position and then begin to try to highlight some of the things that thing is dependent on, or a lot of dynamics around that. So in that context, in thinking about dealing with negative comments, one is often just owning their comment, in a playful way. Yes, oh yeah, that, I can see that, right? But then you can recontextualize it and show why there's the appearance of the yes, but it's actually maybe not. Or why even what they're identifying as a very bad position, if you can, clearly recognize what the limitations are in what they're naming, but then begin to expand the field. There's like something called polarity management. There's a technique of polarity management where if you have two people who are conflicting around something, the overall process would be, I need first to describe your view in a way that sounds convincing to you, to show you that I get it. Then I describe what my view is in the limited way that you see it. You can say, I can see all of these limitations. What you're pointing to, I can own that. Then you can switch over to showing what is the strength of your position and what is the weakness of their position. And each person has to do that for the other, and move through those four positions, right? So in the comments threads in the forum or Reddit or whatever, you can't do that, but there are parts of those moves that you can make where you first meet them in identification, and then you kind of pull the rug and you expand the field, and you actually leave them someplace that they didn't know that they were going to be standing.
That's complicated. Okay. I as you were saying that, I was thinking about doing that to certain comments, and I certainly could have done that. Wow. That was the best answer I've ever gotten. Thank you.
Oh, okay, good.
It's going to be
it's not easy to do,
a tall mountain to climb. I'm not saying it's not going to be easy to get there, but but you have pointed the direction to go.
I think it's a beautiful yoga to learn that.
Someone else told me that compassion for the other side, which is very, very similar to what you said. Probably the same, probably a step in the journey of what you said is compassion, because so. Sometimes I think some comments come from a place of mental illness, and it's difficult to, I mean, maybe that's just me saying that, but it seems difficult to identify with that or to build up a foundation if they're, but I mean, most comments haven't been baseless. Most comments, you're right, have had a perspective just that I didn't agree with. But even if people are mentally ill and you just can't, it doesn't make sense to even work with them. Like, compassion is important. Like,
right. Right.
They might be in pain in certain situations or angry, and they see you as, and without getting into the ideological stuff and the talk of what they're saying, like there's a difference between what they're saying where you're discriminating because of X, Y, and Z. Instead of that, you could instead say, like, they are angry at me and I can feel their anger and their fear that that I'm moving the world into a worse place, and the compassion they have towards other people that they're trying to help and things like that.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think, if somebody's out to troll you, it's not going to really work very well. Or if they're, mentally ill or emotionally disturbed, I think I fully agree that, you don't need to go through all those ideological moves. You just want to connect with them in a way or just move on. But one thing I think is, mirroring. A lot of people, when they're reacting in that way, they're actually looking for some mirroring. And mirroring in this psychological sense, not affirming in the form of agreement, like saying, oh, yes, that's the rightest thing I ever heard, but reflecting back to them what their concerns are in a way that they feel that their concerns have actually been seen and taken seriously. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with it, but if you can reflect back to them that I see what you're saying and I understand why that would be important for you and why you're expressing this, and to mirror that, a lot of time that's all people are really looking for.
I'm sorry, do you have how much time do you have?
Actually, I do have to go. My wife is waiting for dinner.
Oh, okay.
So.
Oh, wonderful.
But we can wrap up whatever you wanted to say there. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to ask a little, can you give a concrete example of mirroring? So for instance, I went through this process with my friend where she felt she was slighted by someone at a party. And I didn't necessarily want to, my intuition said it wasn't right to feed in and to be like, oh, why did he do this? Yeah, you're right. Fuck him, all this different stuff. But I didn't really know what to do. So could you, if I said like I was slighted by someone at a party, is there something that you could, how would you mirror that in a way without getting caught up in the story of it?
You might just ask them to tell you a little bit about what happened. And then just to offer an understanding kind of comment, like, oh, yeah, I can understand how it would really hurt. You're approaching that with that set of expectations, and then you receive that. That must have been really painful.
Wow. Yep.
Just
Okay.
very simple.
That feels right and so simple and something I didn't do. Okay. Bruce, having you on has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. It's I'm so thankful that you were able to spend 2 hours with me.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. And where can people find you?
Probably the best place is the Integral Stage. That's the YouTube channel where I'm doing a lot of videos, and we have some forums on Facebook and things, but most of my energy is going to the Integral Stage these days. So.
And you have a new videos on dreaming, and you talk a lot about shamanism as well. Is that correct?
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, and we were going to talk about that. Maybe we can do that more another time.
I would love to.
Yeah, definitely. Very, very deeply interested in that, and my friend Layman is too. We're both very interested in that.
It's an excellent podcast. Even if you, well, now you know something about Integral, having watched this, but I would highly recommend it. Those guys are, Bruce had to keep up with me, so he wasn't really showing his full intellectual prowess, but those guys are just, it is incredible to watch how deeply they think about subjects. So I would highly recommend that podcast. And yeah, so thanks very much, Bruce. I'll see you on another podcast, hopefully.
Sounds good. Bye.
Great.
Thank you. Take care.
See you later.
Bye.